So next, I want to hit probably two examples of what the same activity looks like at three different stages of growth. So as we dive into that, maybe that'll help explain some things. So I think the first step is project management, just the both the function of project management and the role, because those are two different things. When you're small, it's really not even a role. When you're small, it's likely the owner is handling all of it, and there's very little project management requirements just due to the nature and the size of the projects. And then let's say at that scalable foundation size around 150 people, that's the stage where we call it scalable foundation, because you, for the major functions in the company, which is usually the get work, the estimating function, the project management function, and accounting, you start to have some pretty clear expectations for what the PMs need to do, but they still have very little support. They're generalists and they're doing a little bit of everything. They're doing some estimating, they're doing some purchasing, and they have some systems and tools, but the use is totally inconsistent. So that's normal. That's exactly what they should be doing at that stage. And when you move over to stage 6 plus, you've now taken that project management function and you've broken it down into somewhere between 4 to 6 very distinct roles, from project executive through project engineer, project coordinator level, people. They make up the total project management function. They have clear career paths and training for each role. That a lot of that training involves cross training for other roles. So that management trainee program will include 6 months in estimating or a year in estimating to learn those skills and learn how everything integrates. They have really robust support functions, coming from estimating, purchasing, contracts, virtual construction, fabrication. And so it's really narrowed the scope of what the PM is expected to do, and at the same time specialized it into multiple roles. And then they have both clear outcome and process expectations, not just what's expected for them to achieve, but how they're expected to achieve it. As you mentioned, the checklist. Anybody doesn't know, Sue is a checklist queen. She loves checklists. Don't ever mistake a checklist from an action item list in front of Sue. It's not a good look. So but this is the progression that's going on, and it's interesting. We have several clients right now that are going through specifically with the PMs and adding in centralized purchasing, and that's something that usually happens in between stage 4 and 5. And that's not a hard and fast rule. Some companies might have integrated that function earlier. A lot of that just depends on the dynamics of the business and the leadership. But many times it happens for between stage 4 and 5 that they centralize, how that buyout and how that procurement is happening. And it's super interesting. If you watch a project, like I came from a company that had done centralized purchasing starting very early. So to me, I didn't know anything else. That was a shock to me when I got out and started consulting in 2005 and realizing how many contractors didn't have that. So I never knew anything besides calling somebody up and saying, "Hey, I need X, Y, and Z." They knew what the requirements on the job were. They knew the specs. They knew that, what was approved from a submittal standpoint, and it just magically showed up. And I think that's the coolest thing ever as a project manager or superintendent. And it's so interesting because then I'm realizing that you get into a company where the project manager, the superintendent, or both are directly responsible for ordering the material, including the vendor management and all aspects of it. And they look at it like it's not a benefit to have, a purchasing, agent. They look at it like, why would you take that control from me? I need that control to run the job. So this gets into our first floor and ceiling. So what have you seen within the project management function now within your career, Sue?
Well, it's very interesting because the before consulting, right? When I was actually, working for a general or a prime contractor, it's funny, right? As a 6 plus, right? Big company. Uh, Funny thing there, we did not have centralized purchasing. And I tell you, tough trying to it's tough trying to change a culture that when you look at, I mean, you look at this 6 plus, right? And the sustainable scaling. That is, the project manager is responsible for basically everything on that job. And uh distinct roles that have been, project engineer, field engineer, all these roles that work and report up through the project manager. When you talk about purchasing, that purchasing was always done on the job. When you've structured it that long or that way for so long, and now you try to implement a centralized purchasing module, it can get a little crazy because, again, it is exactly like you said, David. It is project manager wondering, how can you take this control away from me? Even though central purchasing in this case, right, can save a lot of money, things like that. And you do have to plan ahead for things like that. Yet, some of the projects I'd worked around, we had to plan 4, 5, 6 months in advance to package up barges to send them to Alaska. And you had to package them in such a way that the right things would come off at the right time. So it's not like planning and scheduling wasn't our thing, but it was that loss of control. So it is interesting going from that, the startup in one, because now consulting and working with some of those smaller kind of startup type companies, it's difficult to go from a one to a four, right? To go from that starting up to that scalable foundation, because you're used to having the purchase order book in your pocket. You're used to knowing every dollar that goes out the door, and you measure things in dollars and cents. As you move up to that four and you become scalable, you start to round, right? You start rounding to the nearest thousand, maybe the nearest 10,000. Then
Right.
you're getting to the fives and sixes, and now you're rounding to the nearest million. So that it just kind of again explains the level of changes. But you're right. In the scalable foundation, that project manager kind of does everything, knows everything, and can ask all the questions because they pretty much know everything that's going on. When you start to get on that bigger work and you start to get with those bigger organizations, you really do have to trust the people below you. And that, it's a different skill level. It's a different skill level going from, through a level four where you're doing it all yourself. You're doing a lot, you're doing it all yourself, to that 5 or 6 where now you're not doing it yourself. You're doing it through others who are doing that work. And
Yeah.
that, yeah, that's a whole different, a whole different skill that needs to be taught and figured out if this is what somebody really, really wants to do.
So I was using the analogy the other day with somebody on, it's kind of like the difference between basketball is basketball, except you train very differently. If I'm training to, this is a horrible analogy for you and me, so because I don't even like basketball and I'm definitely no good at it. I don't know about you, but if we're training for one-on-one game, it's still dribbling, shooting, blocking. It's all of the basics, but we would train much differently to play one-on-one versus playing as a team, because as a team you have to play so much and passing the ball around and having that perfect situational awareness to simply know that, okay, if I'm in this position and the rest of the people are here, I know that I've got 3 or 4 teammates that are behind me. And if I just throw the ball, they will retrieve it and they will, they're going to run their play exactly as they should. And that's a very different training, when you get down to it, because it comes down to the handoff. So I think, the important piece, and there's 100 of these different. This is probably the beginning of our floors and ceilings and all of that discussion. And there's 100 different growth points that you go through as a contractor. We're just giving an example of the project management. And it's important to look at it and go, each one of these, each level of structure is totally appropriate for the stage of growth. You couldn't take the 6+ structure and bolt it onto a number two, size company.
Right.
You can do something slightly out of order, like you might centralize purchasing, much earlier in the process. But even with the centralized purchasing, let's say you get into that scalable foundation and you've centralized purchasing, everything else the PM is doing is still there. It's very much a generalist role. It's single accountability. It's pretty simple. There's a lot of inconsistencies and things like that. So you're always progressing towards specialization and towards consistency is what you're progressing towards. So let's hit one more example of